From our world headquarters in New York, Bloomberg Surveillance, Ken Pruitt and Tom Keenan with us, our guest host for this hour. We look at the media with Craig Moffett of Sanford Bernstein, their senior analyst. I love these reports. You got the view from 35,000 feet. You got the minutia of EBITDA and net cash flow yield and all this other crunchy stuff. You say there's too many cooks in the kitchen when we look at cable TV, wireless cell phone. Is there just too many people competing for the American consumer and their media dollar?
Well, that's right, especially in the wireless business. You know, we wrote a piece last week, and it started with what I think for most people is a very surprising and counterintuitive statistic, and it's simply that the wireless business now in the U.S. is growing slower than the video business in the U.S. The video business now is growing at about 5.5% a year. Wireless as an industry is now growing only about 3.5% a year top line.
I mean, to be polite, Verizon's not getting it done.
Well, Verizon's actually doing pretty well. You've got Verizon and AT&T that are taking share, but you've got an industry where two of the biggest four players are now shrinking, and where the small guys, Leap, Metro, and all the resellers, are battling it out on price, and so you've got an overall industry now that everybody still thinks of as a growth business, where revenue per customer is now declining almost 2% a year.
What's the next new thing?
Well, look, this is a business that's been driven by data growth, right? And everybody's the iPhone and Kindles, all that's terrific. The problem is it's still a business that's built on voice, and voice is shrinking, shrinking because of price and shrinking because it's saturated. And the real question is, are all of these next new things big enough to actually keep the business growing? They're not in Europe. I mean, if you look at the rest of the OECD, wireless is actually a shrinking business in everywhere except the developing world.
Well, you've got the consumer here, and you've got the idea of, okay, what's in it for the shareholders? One of the great distinctions you make here with your work on cable TV is the idea of giving it back to the shareholders, the idea of, okay, there's this turmoil, shrinking businesses, everybody grappling day to day with the new media, which is our theme for the hour. And I love what you say here. You put in italics the word tone. What is the tone come Labor Day and into the fall from all these different managements as they struggle with the media? Are they going to start giving that prodigious cash flow back to the shareholders?
I think you're going to see a mixed bag, Tom. I think there are management teams that have made real clear commitments with what they want to do with their cash. One of the companies I like best in my coverage is Time Warner Cable, because they've been very clear about what they're going to do with their cash. They're going to take the cash, they're going to pay down debt. When they finish paying down debt, they will either pay a dividend or buy back stock.
Do you trust them?
And that's a management team I trust. You know, here's something that's really striking. It'll be fascinating to talk to Michael about this when he comes in. Time Warner Cable is, since it's been spun off from Time Warner back in the early part of this year, is the first truly shareholder-owned cable company the United States has ever seen. I mean, think about that for a second. Yeah. This is a big industry, and yet there has never been a company before Time Warner Cable that wasn't family-owned, that didn't have two classes of stock, that wasn't owned by a conglomerate. It's a very interesting company, partly because you've actually got grown-up corporate governance in a company.
Can the
like
newspaper business have this conversation? I mean, Ken focuses on this a lot, but can they even have this conversation about cash flow and use of it?
I think the newspaper business is in a very different place. The cable business is, fortunately for them, in a pretty strong position, and they're generating a lot of cash. They're still growing businesses. That's a completely different universe from where the newspapers are today. The newspapers are fighting for survival, and getting rid of excess cash is the least of their problems.
Well, back to Time Warner Cable, it's an interesting point. It's the only one without some kind of family control like the Dolans at Cablevision and on and on and on.
And the Roberts at Comcast.
Yeah, right. Does that mean we want to own Time Warner Cable and we want to stay away from the rest of them?
Well, I don't know about staying away from the rest of them. It certainly means that Time Warner Cable warrants a premium, and you should be willing to pay a little bit more for Time Warner Cable.
Bring us up to date on Cablevision.
Cablevision is such a complicated nest of assets, right? It's actually, for lots of the commentary that you often hear about the Dolans, it's probably the best run cable company in the country. The cable division here in New York is an exceptionally well-run franchise.
Do we insert a Knicks joke here?
I didn't mention the Knicks.
Barry Ritholtz is not with us today.
I didn't mention the Knicks and the Rangers. But here's what's happening at Cablevision. They're in the process of spinning off the Madison Square Garden unit. And the Madison Square Garden unit is most visibly recognized as the Knicks and the Rangers, but it's also the arena itself. It's also the Beacon Theater. It's Radio City Music Hall. It's a whole set of really interesting assets. I think the question that investors are struggling with MSG, as Madison Square Garden, is it may be worth a lot, but how are you going to get paid as an investor? Because it's not like it's going to be sold. It's not like Jimmy Dolan is going to exit and sell it. And it's a wonderful set of assets, but they don't generate a lot of cash. And they're into a major reinvestment phase in the garden itself. So people are scratching their head over what's the investment thesis for Madison Square Garden right now.
When you talk to all the VC guys, I think of Fred Wilson at Union Square, avc.com. When you talk to the new guys, I mean, we've been talking these institutional platforms like Cablevision, like the New York Times. What's the thing percolating as we go into September? I mean, you wrote that piece a year ago, that classic piece about the future of the business. Kind of was like 5 pages long, and it was just the future of the business, making money at this business. What's the new into September?
Well,
or is the new that there's no new?
No. Look, there's since we wrote that piece a year ago. One of the things that we said, the piece was sort of subtitled "The Emperor Has No Clothes," and what we were referring to is the idea that you're going to take content and give it away for free on the web with ad support only was a crazy idea from the get-go, right? It never made any sense. I think what's really striking in the last, especially 6 months or so, is that suddenly everybody has figured out that newspapers giving away content in the hopes that they were going to sort of make it up in eyeballs was the original sin. It was a crazy idea, should have never been done, and now they're trying to retreat, and you're seeing all these new ideas explored.
Which one do you like best? We got 30 seconds here or so. Well, which one works best for Craig Moffett?
This whole TV everywhere concept, where the content companies are essentially giving customers full access to all of their content, as long as you're a subscriber to cable TV or Verizon or DirecTV, seems like a pretty sensible place to start. We'll see how that works.
Oh, we got a lot more to talk about here. Craig Moffett, our guest host, is Look at Media. Michael Wolff will join us in the next half hour from Vanity Fair. Some terrific essays, really Washington-focused. Ken, what I'm looking at, LIBOR OIS, it just drives lower, 17 basis points. Absolutely remarkable. That is just narrow spreads, a little bit of trust back into the system. You're out on Twitter, Vonnie.
I will be soon.
You will be soon.
What did you think of that?
Craig Moffett will be the first one to sign up here. I mean, you come out on Twitter. We're all multimedia.
I'm actually out for the last year and a half. I was out before other people were on, and so I was getting no followers.
So now it's like, okay, very, very good. Craig Moffett, Vonnie Quinn, and others joining Twitter and all that. When you bring all this together and you go across the country, forget about the easy stories about the mainstream media. Where's the media usage of the great American public going to be in 5 years?
It's a great question. Look, here's an interesting.
Besides, we're all going to be following Vonnie Quinn on Twitter. Other than that,
but no, I thought it was fascinating. The article that came out about Twitter this week that suggested that Twitter is sort of the domain of old folks like me. And that young people aren't really using Twitter. It's people of my generation that have actually used Twitter, and the observation that a lot of these new media aren't really starting with the traditional age groups. And I think it's a good reminder that a lot of the sort of received wisdom about how people are going to use media may turn out to be wrong. Here's a really interesting study that came out of Ball State. Ball State University did a study last year where they actually observed people's media habits in 10-second increments. Completely different than 99% of all the research you see that asks people, what do you do, and then believes them. Yeah. And instead of believing people, they actually saw what people really do. Two big takeaways. Number one, what people think they watch a lot of TV, they watch even more. They watch a huge amount of television. Second, people watch a whole lot less web video than they think they do. They overestimate the amount of web video they consume by 5 or 6-fold. They stay on web video for about 90 seconds, and then they say they just were on it for 14 minutes or something. And so you end up with this picture that says that things are actually changing a little more slowly than you might have thought. Now, it doesn't mean things aren't changing, but it means that, and I think here's another interesting observation, the 50-somethings aren't really all that different from the 18 to 24s. They're using about the same amount of television. They're using about the same amount of online.
There's watching and there's watching. I mean, does this include time when the television's on, but you're not just sitting there watching?
Even the old notion of young people are multitasking all the time. I mean, when's the last time you were actually sitting there transfixed by the television? All of us are doing 5 different things at the same time all the time. So the idea that my daughter, who's in college, happens to be text messaging while she's online and watching television in the background and has an iPod in her ear, that's not really all that different from the way you and I spend our lives.
Let's talk about the New York Times here a little bit. I mean, over the years, we've seen them essentially sell everything that makes money while they hold on to the newspaper, which doesn't make money. And now they're in the process of selling, apparently, their stake in the Boston Red Sox and the New England Sports Television Network. So what's going to be left? What happens when they're down to just the newspaper?
Well, it's not a stock that I cover. I don't cover the newspapers, but for what it's worth, the New York Times may have an easier transition with its brand than just about anybody else. I think when you think about the newspaper business and you hear the New York Times say, here's what we're thinking about subscriptions, or you hear the Wall Street Journal say, here's what we're thinking about subscriptions, you almost have to put that aside and say, yeah, well, okay, that's the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. What about everybody else? The real question isn't whether the New York Times can find a model that works, because of course they can find a model that works. The question is, can the Philadelphia Inquirer find a model that works, or can the Boston Globe?
Craig, just in a minute, there was that great New York Times article on the Philadelphia Inquirer a week ago or so in the Sunday Times. Just very quickly here, the Pew Research Trust shows cable TV makes a lot of money, and then everybody else lose money, lose money, lose money, lose money, lose money. Is cable TV the juggernaut of the next 5 years?
I've always thought it was. Let me go back to the report that we started talking about a couple of minutes ago.
Too many cooks.
Too many cooks in the kitchen. The problem with the wireless business, for example, 7 different players making price decisions, no marginal cost, and so you have a recipe for disaster and price wars, and that's what you've started to get in the last couple of months. You look at the broadband business and the cable business by comparison. You've got a small number of competitors. You've got a protected franchise. You look across the whole distribution universe, the one place where you actually have a real franchise and some structural advantage is in the cable operators.
Well, we'll come back with Craig Moffett and Michael Wolff as well with the yen 93.76. Bloomberg Surveillance, we're brought to you by BMW of Morristown. When you shop us first, there's no reason to go anywhere else.